You're listening to Reverie, True Crime, your gateway to the darkest corners of human nature, where we expose the hidden truths of human depravity. These harrowing stories serve as a sobering reminder to keep our senses keen and our awareness sharp, for predators lurk in unexpected places, patiently waiting and observing. Join us as we unravel mysteries, explore motives, and seek justice for victims as we bring awareness to these cases. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. When we closed out part 2, we learned that Amy Fitzpatrick was scared of her mom's partner, Dave. This began to show up more in the newspapers right before how she felt was very much validated when Dave killed Amy's brother, Dean. We also went through what happened to Dean and Dave. Today we'll pick up with Amy's story, keeping in mind all the theories so far. Could it have been Eric Lucky Wilson, the murderer who boasted about killing her and lived close to her home? Could she have been abducted by the men involved in the underground sex trade? Was Dave capable of being involved? Or was Dean his first kill? Did Amy actually make it home that night before she disappeared? Since her cell phone that Ashley said Amy had in her hands when she left her house was found on Amy's bed? Is it possible that Amy did run away and is out there somewhere to this day? These are just a few of the questions that we can mull over as this story continues. Let's get into it. There's a video of Amy Fitzpatrick taken months before she vanished that friends sometimes still revisit. It's nothing unusual, just a girl being a girl. Amy's in a bedroom, music's playing, there's laughter, dancing with a pretend microphone, slipping behind a door every now and then to avoid being caught on camera. Her friends are giggling in the background. It's harmless, lighthearted teenage fun. But the clip stays with people, not because of what she's doing, but because of what's missing now. Because more than 5 years after that video was recorded, Amy was still gone, frozen in time, forever 15. A sharp, funny Dublin girl with a goofy sense of humor and big blue eyes. And while time moved on, her image didn't. Her friends posted birthday wishes for her 18th and her 21st, but they were writing to a memory. The tragedy of her brother Dean's death years later understandably took much of the spotlight, but Amy's story, her disappearance, has never been solved. And forgetting her would mean ignoring the reality. A vulnerable teenage girl vanished without a trace on foreign soil. She could be anyone's daughter, sister, or friend. What complicates stories like Amy's is that teenage girls who go missing often get misread. Maybe they're seen as dramatic, unstable, even manipulative, when in truth they might be scared, hurt, or hiding from something real. Amy was reported missing more than a full day after she was last seen. That window, those critical 24 hours, closed without answers. Early reports suggested she might have run away. Volunteers and police did search, but the first major operation didn't begin until nearly a week later. She was last seen walking home from her friend's house on New Year's Day, 2008, with nothing more than her cell phone, as we learned would also be found on her bed, and a bag with some clothes that Ashley lent to her. And then nothing. No evidence, no charges. But the people who knew and loved her would never give up. People like her mother, Audrey, who kept her daughter's photo on posters around the Costa del Sol, or the friends who remembered her birthday, or the journalists who kept writing, pushing Amy's name back into the public eye when the world seemed to move on. People often tell families to let go, to accept the worst and move forward. But as one parent once put it, quote, "Would you give up if it were your child?" End quote. No one ever answers yes. Amy's case is complicated, with many details that have never been fully resolved. Some say she looked older than she was in those missing posters, more sophisticated than a typical 15-year-old. Some questioned why she stayed with friends so often. Others wondered if something had happened at home that made her want to leave. And those who questioned if Dave had something to do with it. Amy wasn't from Spain, and that matters because it makes it easier for predators to assume no one is coming for her. It would make it seem easier for her to disappear into the background. But thankfully, there were so many who showed up for her and kept her in the forefront. On June 9th, 2013, the Sunday World published new findings that raised even more suspicions. After Dean's death, many began to ask the question that had been mostly unspoken for years. Had Amy met the same fate? Among the newspaper's findings were letters and her diary that gave a glimpse into how she felt about Dave. In one of the last known letters, she wrote about her volatile relationship with Dave. Amy's best friend, Ashley Rose, later confirmed to reporters that what Amy described was not exaggerated. The fights, the tension, the fear, it was all very real. Amy confided in Ashley often, and what she said made it pretty clear. Whatever was going on in that house was not safe. That's when the controversy and debate around Amy's phone really began. 5 months after Amy vanished, her mother Audrey appeared on The Late Late Show and held up Amy's cell phone. She said she had found it on Amy's bed, but this didn't make any sense to Ashley or her mother Debbie. They both knew Amy had her phone with her the night she disappeared. So, how could it have ended up back in her bedroom? In Amy's diary, she wrote about her frustration. An entry from January of 2006 read, quote, "Dave is being a dick as normal, accusing me of taking money. Why the fuck would I do that? He has no fucking right to say I took it. The stupid, bald, ugly wanker." Another entry simply said, quote, "I stayed at Lisa's last night because Davy was being a dick, as normal." The last time Amy is known to have written about Dave was during the summer of 2007, a few months before she disappeared. She gave a handwritten letter to her cousin Nikki, Audrey's niece, who had been visiting from Ireland. In it, Amy admitted, quote, "You do know I don't really like Dave, and it was nice to talk about him to you. When I have fights with him, I usually go mental, but when you're here, you calm me down." End quote. Ashley, speaking to the Sunday World, put it simply, quote, "Amy never got on with Dave. She hated him. She was definitely unhappy in Spain, and she just wanted to go back to Ireland. She was being bullied at school and hated living with Dave." End quote. As we've learned before, Amy was supposed to go to Ireland with her family for Christmas, but Audrey canceled the trip, saying they couldn't afford it. But Dave would later claim they were millionaires before they spent everything searching for Amy. Ashley remembered Amy's reaction, saying, quote, "She came to my house crying her eyes out, saying, 'I don't know what to do. I hate it here.'" Amy and Dean had the kind of bond you'd expect between siblings. Normal teasing, but real love. And after Dean died, even more truths began to surface. Audrey went to Dean's removal, but missed the burial the next morning. At first, she said she had fallen ill. Later, she said she couldn't watch her child be lowered into the ground. She was afraid she would have a panic attack. A few days before the Sunday World released Amy's diary and the letter to Nikki, Audrey visited Dean's grave, but spent most of that day drinking with Dave, the man who had taken her son's life. An inside source summed it up by saying, quote, "She loves him, but she hates him." Dean's funeral itself had become a point of conflict. Amy and Dean's father, Christopher, the same man Amy had longed to return to in Ireland, had gone to court with Audrey over burial arrangements. In the end, the judge ruled the decision should rest with Sarah, Dean's partner, his best friend, and the mother of their 2-year-old son, Leon. Before Dean died, he had started asking questions, and he was not being quiet about it. He confronted Dave more than once about Amy. Some say that was the real reason why he was killed. Spanish police continued to claim the investigation into Amy's disappearance was still open, but a court in Fuengirola contradicted them, stating that the case had been temporarily closed back in April of 2010. Their statement was, quote, "The judicial investigation into Amy Fitzpatrick's disappearance was provisionally closed. It is not being actively investigated, but the case could be reopened at any time." End quote. In March of 2014, Dave stepped off a flight at Dublin Airport, looking drained, uneasy, and emotional. After years of living in Spain, he was back in Ireland, not for a reunion, not for peace, but to face whatever came next in the fallout of the tragedy of Dean's death. Dave said quietly, quote, "I live in a prison inside myself every day of the week." At this time, he was preparing to answer to a number of charges related to Dean's death. A file was sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions. At that time, he didn't know what the charges would be, but he said he knew what he was walking into. He insisted he was an innocent man and said he came back to Ireland voluntarily, as he always promised he would. Quote, "I had given my word. That was always going to be the case." Still, he wasn't naive about the risks, saying, "It's tough, as you can see, but I'm going to take whatever happens on the chin. I've come back home for Audrey," he said. "She's not really coping well with everything." Audrey was still in Spain, battling serious health problems. Her liver was failing. Her weight had dropped to just 7.5 stone, or 105 pounds. She needed a transplant and fast. Despite everything, Audrey kept supporting him completely. Dave said, quote, "She's fully behind me 100%. Audrey did want to return to Ireland with Dave, but they couldn't afford the ticket, and realistically, she wouldn't have been strong enough to make the journey. Dave said he had to be strong for both of them and face whatever happened. In December of 2014, Justice Minister Frances Fitzgerald addressed families of missing loved ones on National Missing Persons Day commemoration. Quote, "It's a very moving event to go in and meet families and to meet a mother who has lost her son at 18 years old and doesn't know what has happened to him. It's extremely upsetting for them. All you can say is that every single individual person is continuing to be investigated." End quote. On International Missing Children's Day in May of 2015, Audrey and Dave tied the knot after many years together. The two were saying they were pushing for another search and a reconstruction. Audrey said about families of missing children the day she spoke at the Global Day of Remembrance for Children Who Have Gone Missing, quote, "It's like a unity. We're all together. It is a bond between all of us that nobody else will understand. One of the mothers said to me, 'We are all part of a club that no one else wants to be a member of. A child goes missing every 2 minutes in the EU. That's a lot of kids.'" In 2013, after investigating over 7,000 missing children cases, the Gardaí claimed only 3 were still missing. They also stated that they realize missing children are vulnerable to victimization, exploitation, violence, criminal activity, and in some cases, self-harm. In 2012, the Irish Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children introduced the Missing Children's Hotline, which received 220 calls in 2014, including some from kids who were thinking about running away from home. The hotline provides support to children, young people, and their families. They also received calls from parents who just wanted to talk to someone who would give advice and support about their child being missing. In August of 2015, Audrey and Dave were getting ready to take a trip to Spain to sit down with Guardia Civil officers who were investigating Amy's case. Dave was awaiting trial, charged with murder, but he was still allowed to go. They both refused to say what the meeting was specifically going to be about, except that they were hoping to get an update on the investigation. I'm not sure what the outcome of that meeting was, but I don't believe they got many answers from the looks of things going forward. In January of 2016, Amy's dad, Christopher, said he was praying that 2016 would be the year that there would be a breakthrough. He said, quote, "It only feels like yesterday I got the call about Amy. Never in a million years did I think 8 years on I would still be waiting on the news. We know there are people with information who are afraid to come forward. Please do the right thing this year and help us put an end to this ongoing nightmare." End quote. Months later, police would admit that there were no leads or anything they had found, and confessed they were actually back to square one. Years had passed since Amy Fitzpatrick vanished, but the questions lingered, and the silence around her case was deafening. By 2021, Amy's aunt Christine Kinney, Christopher's sister, was still fighting, still emailing, still calling, still doing all she could. Speaking on News Talk Breakfast, she said what her family had felt for years, but had rarely said so plainly. Quote, "As far as I know, the case is in the archives. It's on a shelf somewhere." End quote. That's what it had come down to. A teenager gone without a trace, and her disappearance was now, officially, just paperwork in a cabinet. Christine explained how difficult it had become to get even the smallest updates from Spanish authorities. The Guardia Civil wasn't sharing new information. No reports, no briefings, no transparency. She had recently got in touch with the Gardaí in Ireland, asking if they could at least reach out to their Spanish counterparts. She wasn't asking for miracles. She just wanted answers or even confirmation that someone was still looking. She said, quote, "It's just crazy the way you have to go and fight for every single thing you need." End quote. Christine spoke about her brother Christopher and how the grief never left him. Quote, "He thinks about her every single day. He wakes up thinking of Amy and Dean, and the same before he goes to bed." End quote. He had lost both of his children, one to disappearance, the other to a knife. She went on to say, "It's horrendous. It's horrendous looking at him and knowing nothing is being done, not by the Spanish government, not by our own." But Christine was speaking to anyone willing to listen. She urged Irish citizens to stand with their family, to sign a petition calling for a cold case review, not just for Amy, but for every family living in the same hellacious nightmare. The petition had already gathered thousands of names. It called for something simple, but so important, that across the EU, families of missing persons would have the right to a cold case review at 1, 5, and 10-year intervals. That disappearances would not be just case files gathering dust on a shelf and forgotten. It would be presented to the EU Parliament and to the Irish government. Because if justice couldn't be found in a dusty file folder in Fuengirola, maybe it could start with a signature. And maybe, just maybe, it could start with remembering that Amy Fitzpatrick is not just missing. She is still loved, still missed, and still worth fighting for. Christine Kenny has never stopped speaking for Amy. Then, as her niece's 30th birthday arrived without her, Christine once again called on the Irish authorities to take action, to do what still hasn't been done after all these years. She wanted answers, updates, and accountability. Quote, "At the end of the day, Amy is an Irish citizen, and she is entitled to be fought for. She doesn't understand how a 15-year-old child, a little girl, could completely disappear and still be so easily forgotten by the people in power, saying, quote, 'She was only a child. People don't understand that. Her father is heartbroken.'" Christopher, who Amy used to call constantly from Spain, still lives with that heartache every day. His daughter wanted to come home. She said it again and again, but she never made it back to him. Now, Christine was demanding a cold case review, something thousands of others have also asked for. The petition calling for action at the time had more than 5,400 signatures, each one a reminder that people were still paying attention. She also demanded that Amy be seen for who she really was, not judged, not mischaracterized, not dismissed. Quote, "I just want them not to treat her as one of these tearaways, because she wasn't a tearaway." End quote. Amy was a kid, a bright, funny, deeply feeling girl who danced in bedrooms, loved her friends, and wanted to feel safe. Christine remembers her that way, as a happy kid, especially when she was with her dad. Now, on what should have been Amy's 30th birthday, her family chose to honor her with a moment of peace. They gathered at the Sensory Garden in Edenmore, just music, a small service, and quiet remembrance. In November of 2023, after all these years, Amy's stepfather, Dave, remained a figure of controversy and suspicion. Despite serving time for the manslaughter of Amy's brother, Dean, Dave consistently denied any involvement in Amy's disappearance. Dave has expressed frustration over the lack of progress in the investigation, stating that he identified 4 people in his self published autobiography called How Much Pain Can Our Hearts Endure? And he believes those people should be investigated further. He has recounted efforts to confront one of these individuals, including sending people he knew to the person's UK address, only for the person to dodge contact. Dave claimed that the Irish and Spanish authorities were aware of these interactions but have not pursued them enough. The initial investigation into Amy's disappearance involved extensive searches, including the use of sniffer dogs and helicopters. However, Dave has questioned the sincerity of these efforts, suggesting they may have been more for show than substance. Dave and Audrey have never been officially named as suspects. They felt the focus had been misdirected. Despite time steadily going by, Dave said he was holding on to a little hope that Amy might still be alive, though he acknowledged the likelihood was very slim at that point. He said he wanted to return to Spain if credible information was discovered. Dave said that their connection to the country remained strong. In December of 2023, nearly 16 years after Amy disappeared, Audrey and Dave sat down to speak publicly again, not just about the night Amy vanished, but about everything that followed. Speaking on the Pat Kenny Show, Dave said he never felt like he or Audrey were treated as suspects by Spanish police. He said, quote, "That was the last thing on my mind. My job was to find Amy at all costs. We didn't know what day of the week it was. It started out with hours missing, days missing, weeks and months. Now here we are almost 16 years later." End quote. Audrey agreed, saying they were always considered witnesses, never suspects, saying, quote, "When we did interviews with the Guardia Civil, we were basically witnesses. We were never suspects. Never, ever. We told them everything we did that night. Everybody knew where we were that night." End quote. As we know, Dave was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He only served 5 before he was released in 2021. Many still struggle to understand how Audrey stayed with the man who took her son's life. But she spoke openly about it. Quote, "We've been together 22 years. We've been through everything, especially with Amy. And both of us have been hanging on to each other for Amy for so long." End quote. Audrey opened up about Dean's struggles as well, how he had dealt with mental health issues even before Amy disappeared, saying, quote, "He suffered from psychological problems. He started using drugs early. I don't like to speak ill of him, and I'm not trying to explain away what happened that night. But that wasn't the first time Dean pulled a knife. That wasn't the first time he had a gun. End quote. She said Dean had a kind heart, but the drugs changed him. Quote, he was such a softy, but when the drugs took over, as many people know, there's nothing you can do, and then it just turns. End quote. When she found out how Dean had died, Audrey said she was devastated, but heartbreakingly not surprised. Quote, people might find this hard to believe, but I could understand it. I had seen it before, where Dean took a knife out and Dave had to take it off him. Dean never did anything to me, but he always had this rage in him, and I'm not blaming him. It's not his fault. I turned to alcohol, suicide, nervous breakdowns, the whole lot. Been there, done that. Not being a holy Joe or anything like that, but God, for some reason, wants me to stay alive, and I have to believe it's because I have to find Amy. She admitted that there are days when she doesn't want to keep going, but she does. Quote, even though I want to give up, I don't want to walk this life, I'm still doing it. End quote. Audrey and Dave say they hope that by continuing to speak out to the media in public, someone somewhere might finally remember something, might finally say something. Audrey said she hoped it would be a nudge at someone's conscience. In the hills near Mijas, not far away from where Amy was last seen, Spanish police found something grim: a skull, a scattering of bones, and a suitcase buried in the earth. News of the remains rippled across families who knew the ache of waiting all too well. Among them was Christine, and also Michael Millis, the boyfriend of another woman who vanished in Spain. Agnes Klavina, a 30-year-old Latvian-born waitress, had disappeared after leaving a nightclub in Marbella in 2014. 2 women, 2 years, 2 sets of families without answers. Now they were bound by one haunting possibility. Christine and Michael reached out to one another quietly, offering something rare and necessary: support from someone who understood the exact weight of that silence. Christine said, quote, since news of this body in Spain emerged, Michael has been in touch with me. He's wondering if it could be Agnes. They had been leaning on each other ever since, trying to give each other hope and sharing dread. She said, quote, we share a common connection. We have loved ones belonging to us, missing for some years, and we're there for each other to offer help and assurance. We all want to find both Amy and Agnes, as well as anybody else who is still missing. This has been tormenting all of us for years. We need closure. As someone who's lived this too long, she stated, quote, the body that was found is someone's daughter, and she deserves dignity. Authorities told them the remains had likely been there for over a decade. Early reports suggested the bones belonged to a woman between 25 and 30 years old. That detail casted doubt, but it didn't get rid of the possibility. Christine said, quote, there is a possibility that it could be Amy. There was a satchel bag found with the remains, and Amy used to have a similar type of bag. End quote. Christine has never stopped demanding answers. She has led the charge on behalf of Amy's father's side of the family, speaking publicly, advocating for cold case reviews, and pressing for resources that never came on their own. She even met with Ireland's Foreign Affairs Minister, urging him to help push Spanish authorities to reopen the case with the urgency and care that it deserved from the beginning. Because if that body in the hills does belong to Amy, they deserve to know. And if it doesn't, they still deserve to know. Forensic identification takes time, but Christine knew that, and she wasn't ruling anything out yet, saying, quote, "It takes ages for that type of thing to be dealt with." In an interview with the Irish Mirror 2 years ago, Audrey shared something shocking. She claimed she had been told that Amy had been used by local drug dealers in Spain. She said, quote, "I didn't know anything about this. I was told she would sit in the front of the car like somebody's daughter. These men were in their 40s or 50s, and she sat there and got paid for just being there in the car." Audrey said she never questioned it at the time. Amy often disappeared for long stretches, but Audrey assumed she was going to the shops or out with friends. She had no idea there might be something more dangerous going on. Another friend named Alan told the Irish Mirror about an online conversation he had with Amy shortly before she disappeared. Amy seemed frustrated, maybe even a little rebellious. When her mom had canceled their flight back to Ireland, Amy had come up with what she called a scheme. She wrote to Alan, quote, "I love you, Happy New Year, don't worry about me, I've got a scheme." It's never been clear what that scheme was. Christine also talked about a woman who chose to remain anonymous, but she was persistent. She had been offering information about Amy's case for years. Christine said, quote, "She's never given her name, but she's been giving information over time. This information eventually found its way to me through sources." Christine is now working through what the woman has sent her, which around 2023 were more than 20 pages of information. She said, quote, "I haven't got around to all the bits and pieces. It's ongoing." What's scary is what the woman claims, that the people involved in Amy's disappearance were not strangers. They were known. They were familiar. And after almost 16 years of waiting, that idea, more than anything, might be the hardest to live with. Dave has spent nearly 2 decades under suspicion, not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. He says no one has ever accused him to his face of harming Amy. Still, the accusations have been loud and constant. It was talked about here and there in the press, posted online, and passed around in comment sections. When the interviewer asked him directly, he said, quote, "No, no one really has put it as blunt as you just said it. Look, I'm not out to change anybody's perception. I don't really care what people think. They don't have to walk in my shoes, or Audrey's. Let's just hope one of their kids doesn't go missing. And then I go, Jesus, they must be having a rough time." End quote. Over the years, Dave said he learned how to live with the noise. Quote, "Of course it's going to affect you, but if I was to sit down and start suffering from depression and stuff like that, well, you might as well just swallow a bullet." "Everybody has an opinion like everyone has an asshole," he said. 17 years ago it might have been different, but I'm too old, too wide, too tired now. I know what I have to do to survive, and so does Audrey. He talked more about his book, How Much Pain Can Our Hearts Endure, saying, quote, "That book tells a whole different story, and I hope someone picks it up one day and says, let's look into these 4 people properly." End quote. One of those four, Dave claims, is a British man that he confronted personally. He says he once sat face to face with the man and asked if he had anything to do with Amy's disappearance. Later, he tried to find him again, saying, quote, I sent a few people in England over to his address. He ended up going on the run. Dave said he got on the phone and asked him to come back to Spain. Dave recalled, quote, he said it was too hot. When I first sat down with him, he told me, I never met Amy. But then he rang me a month later and I told him, you lied to me. Over time, Dave said his faith in the investigation began to deteriorate. Quote, we saw the sniffer dogs, the helicopters, all of it. But was it for a show? Yeah, I do believe it was for a show. Another man Dave believes should have drawn more attention spent time around Amy in their home in Spain. Dave said, quote, he was in the house alone with Amy a few times. I didn't know that at the time. I haven't spoken to that man in 16 years. Today, Dave and Audrey live in Carrick-on-Shannon, County Leitrim. He sells cars locally, which he said helps distract from everything else. Quote, you get caught up in doing this, that, and the other. It takes your mind off it. It's just a touch of reality. Speaking on Audrey's health, he said, quote, she's going in next month for an operation. She's doing better than she was, but she's not well. When asked if he believes Amy could still be alive, Dave was hesitant but blunt. Quote, it's fairly high she's gone, but not 100%. 99, not 100. Look, it could be she's off on a yacht somewhere, living the high life. All those things go through your mind. Asked if he would go back to Spain if there was new information, he said, quote, I don't know. That's a tough one. My heart and Audrey's heart, it's in Spain. It wouldn't be a holiday, but if we got the news, we'd be back there in a heartbeat. Ashley Rose, who was 13 at the time, was the last known person to see Amy. At 30 years old, Ashley had so much frustration over how the Spanish police handled her best friend's case. She believed they treated Amy's disappearance as a runaway situation and didn't pursue it seriously. Ashley mentioned that despite a tip-off suggesting Amy's remains might be buried at a nearby racetrack, authorities never searched the area. Ashley also told that she was only interviewed once by the police, shortly after Amy went missing, and hasn't been contacted since. She feels that if Amy had been Spanish, the investigation might have been more thorough. For Amy's family, the pain has not gotten easier with time, and after 17 years, they're no longer asking quietly. Both the Fitzpatricks and the Irish government have been urging the Spanish authorities to take the next step, reclassify Amy's disappearance as a murder investigation. Because after this long with no trace, no sightings, no signs of life, that label of being missing feels not only outdated, but dishonest. Amy's dad has carried that reality in his chest for nearly 2 decades. He recently said the pain of losing Amy feels just as raw today as it did back in 2008. There's nothing that makes it easier. What he wants now is simple: a moment of peace, closure, to know what happened to his daughter, and he's begging, again, for anyone who knows the truth to come forward. Only about 3 weeks after Dave had been let out of prison, he had just walked out of court, now acquitted of assaulting a 73-year-old neighbor, and now For the first time since the trial's end, he was ready to talk about it. He said he regretted it. It was the first and only interview he gave after the verdict. His tone was said to be defiant, defensive, and reflective, often all at once. He kept insisting, quote, "I'm not a violent man. Absolutely not. I think you know my personality by now," end quote. But the images told another story. Jim Fay, the neighbor he was accused of attacking, had ended up with two swollen black eyes and a bloodied face. Dave admitted to headbutting him, claiming it was self-defense, and said the argument started over a joke about McDonald's, but turned dark when Mr. Jim allegedly made cruel, personal remarks toward Audrey. Dave said, quote, "I was only out of prison 3 weeks. Maybe I was still in that mode. I'd just come from a place where you're watching your back constantly," end quote. He claimed he'd tried to leave, that he turned his back, told Audrey they were going, but when he turned around, Jim punched him, allegedly. Dave said he reacted on instinct, quote, "I just headbutted him. It was a reaction." The court had heard the full story, how that trial had been delayed 22 times since 2021, how Dave had signed in at the police station weekly for years, how Jim had once told Gardai he wanted to withdraw his complaint. Dave said of the trials, quote, "It's criminal. 400,000 euro estimated cost to the state. All that for a few sausages on a barbecue." He didn't deny that things got physical. He didn't deny that it got out of control. But he sat upright at the suggestion that he got away with something. Quote, "I don't call living on your nerves for 3.5 years, going to court 22 times, and the stress it caused Audrey, myself, and my family getting away with anything." The trial had fallen apart when key witnesses did not show up, including Jim himself, who was hospitalized. Another witness, Noel Byrne, testified but admitted he hadn't seen everything. The third witness, Tony Scott, never showed, despite attempts to track her down. Judge John Elmer made the call. The evidence was so tenuous, no fair trial could proceed. Quote, "There's a huge hole in the prosecution's case. The only person who could have given a full account was Jim himself, and he wasn't available," end quote. So the jury was instructed to acquit. And now Dave was back in the public eye again, trying to explain a fight that turned into another headline. But the truth, as he tells it, is more complicated than violence or victimhood. Of Jim, Dave said, quote, "I have no problem with that man whatsoever. I've known him for 12 years. He apologized. We moved on." Asked if he regretted headbutting him, he hesitated, then answered, quote, "We're all entitled to defend ourselves." When asked if he'd apologize publicly, he declined. Maybe he already had privately. Maybe he didn't see the point. He said, "I'm not here to change anybody's opinion of me or Audrey. We're just trying to get out of that life. People have their own opinion no matter what we say. Some people probably think I'm a thug who battered a pensioner. Some want a go off you just for who you are." Dave says he was ready for the worst. Quote, "There was a real thought that I could be in prison by the end of the day. It would have probably killed Audrey." At the time, Audrey was still recovering from surgery, still struggling with her health, and the delays of the trial felt like a slow sentence. Dave said, quote, "It's like prison. You're free, technically, but it's got a hold on you," end quote. His restrictions meant he could not leave home between midnight and 4 a.m. That's over a day a week. He said, quote, "Over a few years, that's a fair few months. I believe the state wanted me behind bars again. I'm outspoken. I've written things that are not kind to them." Even after walking free, he knew nothing would change the public's mind. Quote, "I'm only human, but I'm still here. That's all I can do. Hopefully, I'll never come to the attention of the guard eye again, but I can't promise that." 17 years have passed since Amy Fitzpatrick walked out into the night and vanished. Her story has been discussed across newsrooms, courtrooms, dinner tables, and message boards. One woman who lived and worked in the Calahonda and Riviera area in the 2000s remembers Amy, not through headlines, but through little encounters. She used to see Amy most days, and what she saw has never left her. Quote, "She was very quiet, introverted, didn't say a whole lot, the kind of child who'd hide at the back if someone pulled out a camera." End quote. At the very least, in the last 6 months leading up to her disappearance, Amy had stopped going to school. Locals started noticing her around commercial centers late at night. She worked at a bar called Dos Patties, the kind of place, the woman said, where criminals and powerful people came and went. Amy waited tables, served sandwiches, and never made eye contact. The woman said, quote, "She always seemed desperately unhappy. She just looked like she wanted to disappear." End quote. Amy floated between homes, sometimes staying with friends' families for weeks at a time. She borrowed clothes, ate tomato ketchup sandwiches. Her friends said that she barely touched food, and behind all of it was a gnawing desperation. Amy wanted to go home, home to Dublin, home to her dad. The woman said, quote, "She had a flight booked once, but for whatever reason, she never got a lift to the airport." End quote. Likely that was around Christmas when her flight was booked with her family to go visit Ireland, and as we know, the flight was canceled. Some parents considered contacting Spanish social services. Others turned a blind eye. One older English girl admitted to supplying Amy with cannabis, not to hurt her, she claimed, but to ease the pain. She said, quote, "Amy was really, really unhappy. I just did it to help." End quote. Even the woman who knew Amy's face so well didn't realize at first that she was the daughter of Audrey and stepdaughter of Dave. Quote, "And all the time I saw her going to and from work, I think we only spoke twice." End quote. Now, living in another country, the woman has recently been in contact with Amy's father's side of the family. She's angry, heartbroken, confused. Why hasn't this case moved forward? She said, quote, "There is not a chance in hell that Amy had the courage or the know-how to run away. She was either killed in a terrible accident that's being covered up, or she was murdered." End quote. She does not believe Amy was abducted. She does not believe her body will ever be found. Her theory? Amy's remains are buried somewhere in the concrete of the Riviera, poured over during the construction boom in 2008. She said, quote, "There are a lot of loose ends that have never been tied up. People who were never interrogated. Questions no one ever asked." End quote. Amy's family is still pushing, still pleading for the Spanish authorities to upgrade the case from a disappearance to a murder investigation. The Guardia Civil in Fuengirola but says it won't be reclassified unless dramatic new evidence appears. There was a tip off once. Someone said Amy's body might be buried at a nearby racetrack. They even gave the stable number, but no one searched. A lot of people still focus on that particular spot to this day and still want digging to be done. Nearly 2 decades later, here we are. Why wasn't this treated like a child abduction case from the beginning? Why didn't the Spanish police follow up on key leads, on the people who were closest to Amy, the ones who watched her come undone? How many others knew Amy was in danger and did nothing? What was it that made her fall so far, so fast? Was it avoidable? Is it too late to find her? Or are we just waiting to build something else over the truth? Amy Fitzpatrick's story is one of neglect, silence, and missed chances because Amy more than likely did not just disappear. Sadly, she was probably disappeared. Let us not forget Amy Fitzpatrick, Dean Fitzpatrick, or their stories. If there are any updates in Amy's case, I will definitely do an update episode. Thank you so much, and until next time, stay safe and take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As we close out, let us not forget awareness is our greatest defense. In a world that can be dark and grim, vigilance is our beacon of hope. When it comes to the cases we have explored together that have remained unsolved, if you happen to hold a piece of the puzzle, dare to step forward. As author Lois McMaster Bujold once said, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them." Until we reconvene, my friends, stay vigilant and stay informed.